Hi there, my name is Daniel Pace, and today I'm going to attempt to teach you how to shoot in manual mode on a DSLR camera. You ready? Let's jump in, okay? So let's say you got this for Christmas, or you got it on sale, or it's been sitting on your shelf for 6 years and you never done anything with it because every time you try to take pictures with it, you use auto and the pictures are subpar, but then you start messing around with the other settings and then they start getting blurry or too dark or what have you. So you put it down and you don't do anything with it, or you get completely overwhelmed with all the different YouTube videos out there about how to shoot or how to do photography. Well, no worries. Today, we're going to take it step by step with a couple of explanations to help you get a good idea of how the camera works, so then you can change the settings to get the pictures that you're looking for. So grab that Nikon, Canon, Olympus, Pentax, DSLR camera, or mirrorless, and let's get started. Okay, so first things first, you want to be able to turn the camera on and take pictures, right? Maybe this is like no duh, but you need a battery, fully charged, and you need a memory card of some sort. Most cameras are going to take an SD card, but whatever your camera takes, make sure you have that. Okay, once you got that ready to go, switch it to the M setting. M stands for manual. The other settings are basically just semi-automatic, so they're not fully manual, but they're not fully automatic. Once you're in manual mode, you'll be able to control the three most important settings there are when trying to get a good exposure. And those three things are shutter speed, aperture, and ISO, or ISO. When I say exposure, what I'm talking about is the picture being too light or too dark. You want it to be somewhere in between. So you want the right amount of light in the image. The subject is lit up or illuminated exactly how you want it to be, and you adjust the exposure by adjusting the shutter speed, the aperture, and the ISO. If the picture is too dark, it's underexposed. If it's too bright, it's overexposed. In certain situations, you'll have parts of the picture that are completely overexposed, and so they're completely white. That indicates there's no detail, there's no information for the camera sensor to pick up on. Vice versa, there will be some parts that are too dark, and they'll be completely black. There's no information there as well. Your goal is to get as much of that evened out as possible so that the bright parts are not completely white and the dark parts are not completely black. In general, all of this is very general and basic, so we'll go into more advanced stuff later. There are definitely times where you will want to intentionally underexpose or overexpose to get the desired effect, but we can get into that stuff later. For now, let's talk about the big three that form what we like to call the exposure triangle: shutter speed, aperture, and ISO. Let's spend about 1 minute on each of these things. So most DSLR cameras will have a thumb dial that will directly control the shutter speed. Shutter speed refers to how fast the shutter goes across the sensor. Inside of the camera, there's a sensor and a mirror, and in between the mirror and the sensor, there is a rolling piece of plastic that we refer to as the shutter. And this moves across or rolls across the sensor and exposes the sensor to light for a certain amount of time. The shutter speed is how fast the shutter moves across the sensor. Most cameras are going to range anywhere between 30 seconds to 1/4000th of a second or higher, depending on your camera. That means if you have it on 30 seconds and you press the shutter button, the shutter will say open for 30 seconds and then it will close. If you set it for 1/1000th of a second, it'll expose the sensor for 1/1000th of a second, approximately. Generally speaking, a slow shutter speed is for letting in more light because you expose the sensor to light for longer, and those are situations where you need more light or you're trying to capture movement and make something moving look blurry. The opposite end of the spectrum is if there's too much light, you can crank up the shutter speed to something like 1/250th or 1/500th of a second. Higher shutter speeds are designed to capture movement, freeze it in time. Anything on a kit lens that's below 1/60th of a second is going to cause blurry pictures because as you're holding your camera, you're shaking a little bit, even if you think you aren't. So the general rule of thumb is anything below 1/60th about of a second, you want a tripod for, and you will use a slow shutter speed to capture things like stars at nighttime or water to make that nice watery, blurry look. You'll want a fast shutter speed for things like wildlife or sports. Okay, the next thing is aperture. The aperture refers to how much light a lens can let in. Aperture is measured in what we call f-stops, and the term aperture and f-stop is used interchangeably. It's written as a ratio, like f/2.8. This indicates that it's some ratio of the entire amount of lens to how much. Well, there's no reason to get super technical about it. Just know that the numbers work like needle sizes or shotgun gauges or earring gauges, that the higher the number, the smaller the hole, right? So let's say f/22, this would be indicating a very tiny hole, and f/1.8 indicates a very large hole. And that's how it's written, with an f/1.8 or f/5.6, etc. Generally speaking, this will be the biggest indication of the quality of lens that you have. What we call fast lenses are lenses that go all the way down to 1.8, 1.4, 1.2, or below. Generally speaking, the camera lens that comes with your camera will be what we call a kit lens. If you have a kit lens, it's likely that your aperture will go down to 3.5. And the aperture for most kit lenses will change. If you zoom in with your kit lens, your aperture will likely change. It's not a fixed aperture for the entire focal length. If you want anything faster than that, or a lower f-stop number, you're going to have to get a more expensive piece of glass or a more expensive lens. Aperture controls how much light comes in, but the biggest thing that affects your picture when it comes to aperture is the depth of field that you can focus on. So at f/22, pretty much everything that you can see through the viewfinder will be able to be in focus. So high f-stops are usually for either one, controlling how much light there is coming in, or trying to get as much as you can in the frame in focus. If you go all the way down to 1.8, that actually limits how much you can get in focus. And so anything that is close to the frame will be focused on, and anything behind that will get blurry, as you can see me demonstrating now. This is what we refer to as bokeh or bokeh, depending on how fancy you want it to be. And so this bokeh is generally what portrait photographers are going for when they're taking pictures of people. They want to separate the person from the background. And so to do that, they lower the f-stop number to 2.8 or below, and that creates that nice, creamy, blurry background, or bokeh. For now though, if you have a kit lens, you probably only really need to adjust your aperture to compensate for the amounts of light coming in. So just remember, with aperture, a small number is a large hole. A large number is a small hole. It seems counterintuitive, but as time goes on, you'll get the hang of it. The last thing is ISO, or ISO. You can pronounce it either way. It stands for the International Organization of Standards, which, if you're paying attention, doesn't make a lot of sense, because that would be iOS. But the original one was in French, so there is that, and then the company doesn't even really think the company doesn't consider it to be an abbreviation. They say that it comes from the Greek word isos, which means light. So ISO, it doesn't matter. Don't let anybody get snobby about it. Think of ISO like your camera's sensor's sensitivity to light. And so you can have a low ISO with low sensitivity, or a high ISO with high sensitivity. If you're shooting with a low aperture, like 1.8, you're going to be letting in a lot of light. So you don't want your camera sensor to be that sensitive to the light. So you will lower your ISO down to something like 100. If you're shooting at f/22 and you want a wide depth of field to focus on things, then you're going to be shutting out a ton of light. So you're going to need to increase your camera sensitivity to the light to try and get as much light as possible in while maintaining a large depth of field to focus on. Low ISO, low sensitivity; high ISO, high sensitivity. For most entry-level cameras, the sweet spot for ISO is going to be between 100, which is going to be the base ISO, and then up to about 800 or 1600. Anything beyond that is going to introduce some artifacting into the image, or what we would call noise or grain. And this is a result of those pixels being so sensitive. And so you want to avoid shooting at super high ISOs. You'll be able to see these if you shoot at something like 3200, 6400. You'll start to see green and purple chromatic aberrations, is what we call them, around the edges of your subject. And a lot of people can't tell it's there, but if you start really looking at it, you'll be able to notice. And if you ever get to the point where you're editing and you see something that's shot at an extremely high ISO, it'll be difficult to edit out that graininess. Okay, so now that you hopefully have a pretty good idea of the exposure triangle, let's pick up your camera and start playing around with some settings. I want you to turn it on and look through the viewfinder, all right, and just snap a picture with whatever you have there and look at it and see what it looks like. Try to determine the exposure. Is it too dark? It's underexposed. Is it too light? It's overexposed. All right, so to correct this, look again through there and look at and see if you can find this little bar that looks like a bunch of little dashes with a plus and a negative and a 0 in the middle. All right, that's your exposure meter. This is your camera telling you that there's either too much light coming in or not enough light coming in. What you want is no bars on either side. Ideally, in general, you want this, okay? You want it right there in the middle. This means that everything in the image, according to your camera, is properly exposed, or just a mid-tone gray, essentially. Use this as a guide and start to adjust the shutter speed, the aperture, and the ISO to get those lines into the middle. So, whatever you have, I would suggest go down to 1/60th to start with, open up your aperture all the way to 3.5, and then look through the viewfinder again. If everything is going to the minus side, that means there's not enough light. So increase your ISO to 800 and see what it says. If you're 1 or 2 bars or stops to the left or right at this point, you're probably okay. The closer you can get to the middle, the better. But if you're not right on exactly, that's going to be fine. Try taking another picture and compare it to your first one. What changed? Does it look better? Does it look worse? If the lighting is correct, now it's time to move on to the other elements of the picture. Is it blurry? If it's blurry, maybe you moved by accident, so try and keep still. Or maybe your shutter speed is too low. Increase your shutter speed and try again. Well, that's not it by any means. That should give you a good understanding of how these basic settings work to get started. If you don't really understand how it's working completely, that's okay. Photography is a bit involved. Cell phones have made it so that everyone kind of thinks they're a photographer, but it's not really something you just pick up and master in a day. Okay, the next thing that I want to talk about is your camera's controls. All of these are going to be different, and so I'm just going to show you what it looks like on a D3500. And when it comes to how you manipulate these controls with your specific camera, you're going to have to refer elsewhere because I don't have every type of camera to show you. And even different camera models in the same brand will be a little bit different. Generally speaking, the thumb dial will control the shutter speed. And then for aperture, you'll generally press another button and then use the thumb wheel. Or on some models, there will be another wheel on the front of the camera grip. In some models, there'll be a side button that you will press and then use the thumb wheel to control the ISO. In some other kind of models, you'll have to go into the menu setting to change the ISO. I can't really go over every single one of those different ones in one video, but if you need help specifically with your camera, I'd love to be able to help you, and there'll be a link down below where if you need help, you can reach out to me and you can get some one-on-one attention and training. Hopefully for the first session, I'll be able to do it for free. And then anything beyond the first session, I do believe there will be a small fee associated with it, but it is a good chance for you and I to interact directly if you like this video or if you like my way of explaining things. On that note, it doesn't have to be just how your camera works. If you need help with anything else, or if you have other questions, leave a comment below. If you want to see a video about it, give me some ideas. Until then, the best thing that you can do is to just go out and start taking random pictures of anything that you can and change every single setting from one extreme to the other and just figure out exactly how that affects your picture taking. If you made it this far, I do appreciate it. If you would be so kind to leave a comment or subscribe or something, that would be great, but don't feel compelled to. Like I said, if you have other ideas for different videos or you have specific questions, feel free to leave something in the comment section and I will respond to them. If I think that I need to make a video about something specific, I will do that as well. So, all that being said, I hope you have a marvelous day. Hopefully I explained it all enough for you to get a basic understanding. Hope I've helped you out a little bit. Until the next video, be reasonable people. Peace out.